Welcome to the world's first charging garage for EVs only. Now you are under the fortress in the middle of the city center. It's a rustic, as you can see, bomb shelter that was actually converted for parking for EVs. So if you have an EV, you can park here for free and get electricity for free in the middle of everything. When it comes to transport in Norway, it represents 55% of all emissions in the city. So if we are going to do something and meet our obligations from the Paris Agreement, we have to start with transportation. So what we are doing at the moment is actually electrifying everything when it comes to transport. Everything includes the cars, of course, which you can see a lot over here, but the private cars, but also freight vehicles, the big trucks, and all the buses. Well, the most important at the moment, I think, and a potential game changer will be in the charging. Electricity is very common for Norwegian. We have hundreds of years of the tradition for electrification. So way before we were an oil nation in the late 60s, 70s, actually we had used electricity for a long time. And it's based on hydropower, so it's renewable, it's zero emission. And all the heating in the buildings in Norway is not gas or oil heating, it's electricity. And that's also what makes the transport sector so important. So when we were going to reduce the emissions also from the transport sector, it makes sense to start with electricity. If you look at the energy mix in Norway, 99% of all electricity consumption is based on hydropower. So it's cheap, it's clean, and it's renewable. Of course, one thing is pollution, but we of course also want it to be produced in a way that is good for the workers. Their rights should not be repressed. So we are working together with the OEMs and others and trying to put up standards, both on working conditions in the mining, but of course also what can you do with the battery. Battery is not defined as a very polluting thing. It's waste, it's not classified as that, but even so it's very important that you, when you are taking out the batteries, you are treating them very carefully. And but what we want actually is, today you have a car for, let's say, 10 years. After 10 years, if you have charged in an efficient manner, you will still have 80% left on your battery. So instead of treating battery as a problem, we want to take them out and reuse them, give them a second life. And one thing you can do with them is actually pile them up in big racks and use them as a smart grid solutions in parking garages and so on to balance the grid. And then they can get a second life for, let's say, 15 more years. So that's important from an environmental perspective, and we've been in contact also with French OEMs to try to find the best way to actually treat battery not as a problem but as a potential important source of a resource in the future. My job is to promote EVs, but of course we need a holistic view. You don't want more private cars into a city center, because the problem with cars is that you get congestion, you get queues, and you don't want that. So actually what we want to promote is public transportation. As we say, public transportation is always king. Then we want to do more on cycling. At the moment, we actually use 10 times more money on cycling compared to EVs in Oslo. So people tend to forget that. So it's part of the equation. You need more public transportation, but you need also to make it better and more attractive for pedestrians and cyclists. And also, of course, there will always be cars. So, but it's important to have the alternatives available, like car sharing. And yeah, all cities in Europe are actually trying to push car sharing. So far, the results are not that great, but what we see now is a generation shift with the younger people, but also older people without young kids. They are actually selling their cars and starting in a car sharing scheme. So we're getting there, step by step. It takes a little bit time, but car sharing with zero emission car, like in Madrid or in Paris, very important. First one is, of course, that things are moving so extremely fast. 2 years ago, like 10% of all the total car stock in Oslo were electric. Now it's 24. Next year it will probably be 50. So it's moving so fast. It's an exponential growth of EVs of over 100%. So to be honest, it's an extremely funny job, but sometimes you feel like you are walking, running for the metro every morning, and the train is going faster and faster, and you are not able to catch it. So the growth itself is a challenge. We have to deploy more, but we also have to make it smarter. Moving the cars out from the streets, like in this parking garage, underground, in parking garages, in mobility houses, which also includes cycling hotels and stuff like that, and car sharing. And also another challenge, of course, is not only the growth, but it's the fact that 61% of people living in Oslo are living in flats. Not in detached villas. Because if you have a big villa, you probably are able to charge your car in the garage. And if you are living in a common housing association, it could be a little bit more difficult, especially if you don't have a parking place, then you really have a problem. Then you have to rely on curbside public chargers. So those are the ones we want to supply, but also the ones that are living in older multi-family houses where the capacity in that garage for electricity is limited. So what we actually do is not only building like 1,600 chargers around in the city, but we also have a very important subsidy schemes for private housing associations and companies. So they can apply for a subsidy to make sure they can invest in infrastructure, smart grid solutions, enough capacity from the grid into the building and so on. We will support that because that's far more cost efficient for the city. Also, it's much more convenient for the users because then you can just park in your parking place overnight, just plug in, go and make your dinner and watching television or whatever, and when you wake up in the morning you are good to go to work again. So that's important. Last year, so far the two last year, we actually made it possible for 40,000 new parking places on private ground. So that's the key. After that, it's the public chargers. There you have the right combination. It's important to make it as efficient as possible. So you have curbside chargers, you have mobility garages like this one, several of them. Also quick chargers as a safety net, but also to help more commercial vehicles. And so it's possible to have the right solution. But of course, there are other obstacles. One other is, of course, limited space in a city, because we want to do a lot of important things like making it more accessible for the trams. We want to open up the street for the public to move out the cars, but also we want cycling lanes, and all that requires space. And sometimes also it's like a transition from more traditional thinking, where we had this huge harbor just renting out for private use of cars. we have to stop with that. We have to make sure that the space is used to actually have measures like car sharing with zero emission cars, with cycling hotels and stuff like that, but also for electrification of commercial vehicles. So we have to use the space a little bit more efficiently, but limited space can be a challenge, to be honest. So that's probably one of the biggest problems at the moment.